Well, it's good to see you. We're looking at Bible geography. And before we get started, let's have a word of prayer together, shall we? Our Father in heaven, Lord God, we're thankful for this day, and we're thankful for this opportunity that we have to come together as brethren, as friends, and to study this unique subject where we talk about just the geography, Father, of the Bible lands, and helps to put us in perspective of being able to realize this happened, the story of creation. I mean, the story of the story of creation, the narrative of Jesus' birth, the prophets, Israel of old, the patriarchs. All of that is something that happened in real time in real places, Father. And this helps us to be able to see some places and think about the events that took place there. And we're just thankful for this opportunity, for this class, and pray you'd be with Mr. Whitey, and hope that his situation is good and that he will be able to make his way back home. And just we're thinking about Rick and that whole situation. So we ask all this in your son's name. Amen. Let's jump in, shall we? I'm not sure what your requirements are going to be. We're just going to follow Monday night. We're just going to go right down the book there and keep the main topics that you have. Don't know that I gave you... Probably didn't give you the index, and I'm sorry about that. Next, chapter 2 is archaeology. I skipped that, and then go right into Palestine in chapter 3. So if you kind of wanted to maybe look ahead, but you just have chapter 1 tonight and a few maps there, okay? So here we are, Bible geography, the definition of geography, the word gay. It's gamma eta. We pronounce that gay. It's Matthew 5, verse 5. It's the Greek word for earth. Graphos or graphi, from graphos means to write. Mark chapter 10 at verse 4. So, geography, what are you handing out now? More maps. We're going to be well mapped. Okay. Did I not pass that out? I had 15 of them. That's the ones I brought? I hope. Okay, I thought you had went and made some. I was going, man, that's awful. I'm sorry. Okay, so definition of geography basically is just the story of the earth, if you will, to write down about the earth. The science of geography involves both the human side, its culture, communities, interaction, and then, of course, the physical side is what we're going to be looking at. Bible geography is just Bible lands. I attended lectureships and been to a lot of classes, but one that really stuck out to me, and it really kind of brought home to me how much nicer it is when you have some type of perspective. A fellow by the name of Earl Edwards is one of the, he was a teacher there. I think he's retired now at Freed Hardeman. He had a son. Is it Tim? Oh, it's terrible. I can't remember his name. But anyway, he did a 2-part lesson on Corinth, and it was just the geography of Corinth. And I learned so much from that I had to go home and preach on Corinth. You know, I mean, it was just so great to be able to talk about. It had such an immense, all around you, all these pagan temples. When you look at Agra Corinth, that kind of looks like Lookout Mountain behind the city itself is this big building up there. That's where they had the temple, where you had all the prophetesses and homosexuals, whatever you wanted, and they did that for religious purposes. If you can somehow put that together, absolutely amazing. And to be able to see that, and then Corinth, the reason it was so popular, you got that little piece of land that connects Peloponnesia with Greece. And they didn't want to go out into the Mediterranean because the weather is real bad there from November to February. And so they just drug boats across the land there. They dug a little trough, laid it down with stone. You'd put these little logs in. They'd empty the boat on one side in the Aegean. And then they would use animals to carry the equipment, all the stuff that was on the boat as they drug the boat across this little alley thing, put it in the Adriatic, where you could get on to Rome, and you wouldn't have to take that big chance of going around the Peloponnesia and being out in the Mediterranean. I just thought, so why was that so significant? Well, it made Corinth a really popular place. 700,000 people lived in Corinth at the time that, that's bigger than Chattanooga. See, it was a big town, but what was interesting about that's over half of them were slaves. We think today, that's all we hear so much about slavery and how Americans, we're just, and people want to be really give us a hard time about the war and so forth that we had. But every nation under the sun has had slavery. All of us, somebody in our genealogy was a slave somewhere. Now, whether it was Europe or, wherever, that has happened. And so to see that in Corinth, that really helped me out. On a map, this need to get going here. This is a regular old map. Geography is important. These right here are called grid squares. They're 1,000 meters by 1,000 meters. They use kilometers and so forth. And so you kind of get an idea of just how, when you're looking at a map, how to read it. Notice this right here is what we would call, this is magnetic north and so forth, contour lines. These become important when you start thinking about, you don't think about it a lot. Jerusalem's at 2,500 feet, let's just say, give or take, elevation. Well, the Dead Sea is about, minus 900. And so you're talking about 3,400 feet. That's not, you don't see that around here much. I used to live on top of a flat top mountain between Dunlap and Saudi Daisy. And we used to live on top of a ridge so it was awful. It was cold all the time. It just wind, But anyway, it's about 2,200 feet. And it'd be snowing like everything. And halfway down the mountain, it ain't doing anything. Well, you get out west, and that becomes even more striking. They close roads. Try to figure out on your map your trip of Yellowstone during the winter. You can't even tell how long it's going to take because all the roads are closed. So, the Google Maps won't even tell you how long it'll take you because you can't do it. It's all about elevation. It's about, where you are. And it all has to do, with how we operate, how we live, where we live. This right here is called a compass rose. It's always important when you're looking at a map to try to orient it to north, south, east, west. I was listening to Hannah Clayton. Any of y'all know Hannah Clayton? Next time I see her, I'm just going to smack her. She says she doesn't, when somebody says east or west, she doesn't know which way is which. I'm like, look, you know that over there toward Saudi Daisy, that's east. That's where the sun comes out. Cagle Mountain is west. Well, if there's one place in the world you ought to not have any trouble with north, south, east, west, it ought to be a Squatchy Valley, right? You know where the sun comes up. You know that Pikeville's north of Dunlap, so you ought to be good with that. But that's a compass rose. You always want to make sure that your map is oriented correctly. They came out with this about the early 1990s. Y'all know what that is? That's one of them old Garwins. Remember, I wanted one of those so bad. I'm so glad I didn't spend the $450 to get it, because about 2 years later, all the cell phones came out, already had them in it, But anyway, this is significant. This tells you where you are and everything, because this fella right here wasn't counting on that. This guy's name's Saddam Hussein. In 1991, when we were activated to go and have a good time, he was convinced that they would be fine, that the Americans wouldn't be able to navigate in the desert because they wouldn't know where they are. If you're not familiar with the desert, it changes overnight. They're constantly having to send road sweepers out because the roads will be covered up, be under sand. And so he thought there's no way that they will be able to figure out where they are. Well, by the time that war got going, every American unit had a global positioning system in their vehicles. And so that was not even a thing. So knowing where you are, that can be a pretty important thing. This is going to be what we're going to be looking at. This is the Fertile Crescent. This point, I tell you what, that's a big place today as far as the news is concerned. Is it potty break time? Well, I wish I'd known that. But no, I'm just kidding. But this is the Fertile Crescent. This is where you lived in Bible times. This is where you could farm, where there was water. You just didn't go here. It was almost like having a big wall built, if you will. You weren't going to be attacked from that side because nobody went that way. The bad thing for the Jews is the fact this is the freeway system between the largest, richest kingdoms in the world. And you know how that goes. They're always wanting to kill one another. And so you got Egypt down here with all the money and the wealth that they've had for thousands of years. You got the Assyrian kingdom. You'll have the Babylonian kingdom. You'll have the the Persian Empire, which will eventually go over here and try to whoop Greece and get stopped at Thermopylae. And all of that is so Bible-oriented because that's right about the time that Esther, we read the book of Esther, or Xerxes. He's the one that his daddy went to war with the Greeks to begin with, and it's probably a good chance that he's the one that was defeated and lost his entire fleet over here as he was trying to attack the Greeks. And they had a hard time getting home, and it was a real mess. They estimate that it was about 1,000,000-man army, and we're talking, 300. What would that have been? Let's put that in perspective. Jews go home, what about between 550, 440? So about, 450 to 400 BC, you have all of this going on where you have 1,000,000 folks, that go over and want to take over the world. Just great. Just a whole lot of stuff here. Red Sea, remember what happens here? What's significant about the Red Sea? What happens down there that sticks out in our mind? Moses, yeah, bad boy. And, they want to try to make them cross up here. No, that ain't where they crossed. They crossed at the Red Sea. But the Red Sea has like 2 antennas on it, okay? 2 little ears, if you will, that come up off of it. This here, of course, is the Gulf of Suez. This is the Gulf of Aqaba. And the Suez, what do we think about the Suez that always sticks in our mind modern day? The Suez Canal. Yeah, guess who used to own that bad boy? United States. And what did we do? We gave it away. That's how you do things, right? Anyway, this right here, see how this is green here? This is Egypt, and this is where Israel lived. You remember the name of it? The land of what? Goshen. Yeah, and that's where it's heavily watered. And the Nile is the largest river in all the world. And you know what's significant or what's different about the Nile River than most of your other great rivers? The direction it flows. It goes from south to north. Most of the time, rivers flow the other way. And that's why you have this big delta, delta area where it's emptying out, kind of like Mississippi. I think of our Mississippi Delta, at the Louisiana and New Orleans and all that. But that's why the delta's up here. What are some other things? Didn't know this place existed. Never heard of Kuwait, but I learned a lot about it afterwards. We're pretty significant now. We kind of know where Saudi Arabia and all this stuff is. Baghdad, Iraq. Think of these 2 rivers right here. You have the Tigris and the Euphrates. And we use a Greek word to name that place. It's called Mesopotamia, which is Greek for land between the rivers, land between the 2 rivers. We'll look at all this stuff. But that's where we are. Caspian Sea here. It's salt. Black Sea, fresh water. Istanbul, do you know what that used to be called? Constantinople, named after a Roman emperor. Can't see Italy here, but the Roman Empire actually divides into 2. You have the Western Empire, which is Rome, and then you'll have the Eastern Empire, which stays another 1,000 years. It's about 1450, I think, when the Muslims finally destroy it. But big cannon. This Turkish guy, Muslim, he has the world's largest cannon at that time manufactured, and they use it to beat down the Great Wall, that Istanbul had been known for, and that's how they were able to overtake it. One of the things that you'll have to appreciate, especially with modern history, the Black Sea, you can see Georgia here, Russia, Azerbaijan, but what's in the news right now more than anything is what's the country? Everybody's flying their flag? Yellow and blue? Ukraine, yes. And so when you see the Caspian Sea, it's one of the largest bodies of water. It's like 700 miles, I think, across, and it's huge. Black Sea. These are great barriers. Think about how many more people would have been dead had this not been here to separate these countries. A lot of the geography that you find in Palestine, elevation, it's just, God and all his wisdom saw fit to keep us apart, I think, for most time. Let's go ahead and drive on here. Here is a blown up version of the Mediterranean. Antioch of Syria, that's the great mission church. I always got it confused because there's 2 of them. So be careful with that. Antioch of Syria. Antioch is where Barnabas is, and he gets Paul, and they go and they work there for a while. Antioch is where they are when they go down to Jerusalem to talk about this idea of having to be circumcised to be a Christian. Remember that, Acts chapter 15. Of course, you have Jerusalem, Ephesus. We think of the 7 churches of Asia right here, the Aegean. Then you have the Adriatic. You have the Mediterranean, which is, it is. Then, of course, we want to talk about Carthage and this little group right here. You have Tyre and Sidon, the Phoenicians, and they are the ones that are actually established Carthage. And it's interesting because Hannibal worshipped Baal, just like, the big Baal cult that we have in Tyre and Phoenicia that are always a thorn in the flesh for the northern kingdom. What's her name? What is the one lady who nobody ever names their daughter after? Jezebel. And what is at the end of her name? Baal. And what was significant about Baal worship was they killed their children. They would sacrifice their children. As a matter of fact, there's a great story about Hannibal and his dad, who was a famous general, and took him to the temple. And instead of killing him, they killed a lamb. And you have to read it sometime. Most folks think that there's some truth to it. But anyway, Hannibal, of course, becomes a great thorn in the flesh of Rome. And one of the reasons we need to know all this stuff is when we study the book of Ezekiel, we study the book of Jeremiah, we study the book of Isaiah, Daniel in particular, that really helps us with the scenes that we're going to see. Of course, we talked about the Fertile Crescent. This is where you lived if you were alive and you weren't a scorpion or something, because this is where the water is. The significance of this is, remember, Ur of Chaldees. That's where Abraham is going to come from. Abraham's going to find his way down here. And so all of this, as you read Genesis all the way through the book of Revelation, this is happening here. There's things going on. And it's just good to be able to put it in your head and to remember where people are coming from. You also have idioms or figures of speech. And one of those we find in 1 Samuel 3 at verse 20. And it said, all Israel, from Dan. Notice Dan, far north. Now, the tribe of Dan is going to have a land allotment down here. But this is the city of Dan. Remember how this comes about? We're reading the book of Judges. Remember that? There's a priest that finds his way out somewhere. He's at some guy's house, and you have some Danites who are saying, boy, there's not enough land down here for us. And so they come up here, and they get the prophet of God from that man's house. Remember that? And they go up there, and they find this place where nobody lives. I mean, they live, but they have no contact with other people, and they kill them all. Y'all remember that? Read the book of Judges. Yeah, there you go. So that's the Dan we're talking about. It's the city of Dan. Dan. And now Beersheba, that's about as far down south as you can go. And notice that's the idiom. When they say Dan to Beersheba, they're talking about everybody. Everybody that's in Israel, this is where they're going. This is talking about all of it. Just like we might say from New York to San Francisco or something, talking about the entire scope of the United States. One of the first things that happens, do you remember when the kingdom is divided? That's something we'll talk about later, but you remember the kingdom's going to be divided right there a little bit north of Jerusalem. You're going to have the northern kingdom, the top, the 10 tribes in the north. You'll have the southern kingdom, which is Judah and just what's left of Simeon. Remember, Simeon land allotment is inside the land allotment of Judah. So they kind of just become sort of intermingled, and it's kind of hard to distinguish the two. But first thing, Jeroboam, who's been given the northern kingdom, remember, by God, because of the sin of who? Why was the country separated, remember? One guy. He loved many strange women. Who's that? Solomon, yes. And because he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, and they led him away from God. And he even went so far as to build, pagan temples on the Temple Mount. God says, I'm going to take the kingdom away. I'm going to divide the kingdom. I'm taking it from you, but I'm not going to take it from you out of respect for your Solomon, out of respect for your daddy. And that was who? David. And so it falls to Rehoboam, who loses the kingdom. Jeroboam, you got a Rehoboam in the south, Jeroboam in the north, becomes king. First thing he does at Dan, and then he's going to put one down here in Bethel. Bethel's not on this map, sorry. What does he erect there? Golden calves, right off the bat. Remember what the Bible says about it? He caused Israel to sin, and every king of the northern kingdoms from him forth, from them on, were bad. You only have 4 in the south that are any count. but you got 0 to the north. And it's kind of interesting, as you'll probably talk about next week, how that from this area, the northern kingdom, the 2 greatest non-writing prophets by far, and then 2 of your greatest prophets, that's who they're ministering to, the northern kingdom. You remember their names? My son is named after one of them. Elijah. God is Jehovah. That's what his name means, because everybody up here is having a hard time remembering that. And you remember who he passes the baton, or in this case, the coat? You remember who he passed that to? Yeah, Elisha. And so both these guys are up here. Then, of course, down here you have Ezekiel's from here. He'll end up over here. Daniel's from here. He'll end up being taken as well. And here you have Isaiah, who'll be doing his work there. Great stuff to really make us, want to enjoy and study this stuff. Notice Jonah goes the wrong way. Well, you don't know that if you don't know a little bit about geography. Remember what Jonah's job is? He's supposed to go where? Nineveh. Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. And what's so bad is Jonah knows what Nineveh is going to do. Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrians. Do you know the Assyrians are not known for their artwork? You know why? There isn't any. They're not known for their pottery. There isn't any. You know what they're known for? Killing people. War. Put a ring in your nose. Cut babies out of women's belly. I mean, they were just very, very vicious. That's what they're known for. Jonah knows the kind of people he's going to go preach to. And he thinks, it'd be just my luck to go up there and them yahoos will repent and God will let them live. Right now, it'd be best for us if God just smoked them. And so God says, you go to Nineveh and preach. Jonah says, no, I'm going to go to, well, as we see here on this, I believe it's the next one. No, we went the wrong way. Tarshish. He gets on a boat from here going to the Tarshish, the rock of Gibraltar there, the pathway from the Mediterranean out into the Atlantic Ocean. And of course, God doesn't let that happen. And so he ends up going back. If we know, or being thrown overboard and the whale takes him back, or the big fish. Notice if we know our Bible geography, it helps with things. This fellow right here, most of you probably know him. He's made a life, he's made a living, a good living, by the way, talking about Zionism and the fact that Jesus is coming back and he's going to establish a capital. And that capital, of course, is going to be in Jerusalem. And here's just one of the things that I pulled up. This is back in 21. Coronavirus was just a dress rehearsal for the New World Order. And boy, do they get excited about Daniel chapter 2. Now, this is what Daniel chapter 2 is teaching, okay? You have the head of gold. Remember what Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold. Silver is going to be the Medo-Persian Empire, just like the bear with the 2 things in his mouth. The bronze is going to be Greece, who's the leopard in chapter 7. And the iron and clay, who is going to be Rome. And the difference in these kingdoms, you got one king here, one king here, one king there. But the Rome is got this unique thing. They don't have to have one army that, to just take over. They let you keep your place, if you will. They'll come and take you, and they'll say, okay, here's the deal. Here's your tax bill. If you'll pay this, you can worship your gods. You can do whatever you want to. We'll leave you alone. A lot of people chose to do that, but they had to, toe the line. And when the Roman authorities told them to do certain things, like send us some men to go fight a battle or something, or to be trained up, they had to do that. But so they had this loose conglomerate, but it was powerful in that they had the great road system. They beat the Parthians. They take over, we looked at that earlier. Tyre and Sidon, they're merchants, man. They have got the fleet. They understand commercial ports. Carthage has got they built harbors into the land. And they had these walls that protected those harbors. And for hundreds of years, they basically ruled the Mediterranean until the Romans came along and were able to defeat them. And so then when you have the Romans, they have, especially with Caesar Augustus, what we have called Pax Romana. After Julius Caesar's killed, you have the great battle at Philippi, which you have the 4 generals that 2, Mark Antony and Octavius, are battling Cassius and Brutus, who represented the We Hate Caesar group, right? And so Mark Antony and, help me out, Octavius win. That's always the team you want to be on, right? And so they win. Of course, Mark Antony has his problems with Cleopatra in Egypt. And so Octavius is able to use that to make everybody not like him or whatever. And so Octavius becomes the Roman Empire. He becomes the Roman emperor. And this period of time is called Pax Romana. That always meant something to me because on my ETS, when I was leaving the Army, I was in Germany. And then we had a colonel come to us. And one of the things he's supposed to do is kind of talk you into staying, right? Re-up. And I wasn't re-upping, man. I wanted to leave the Army, you know. But one of the things he talked about was the American soldier and what a great job we had done in Europe and so forth. And I'm like, yeah. And he says, there has never been this amount of peace in Europe since the beginning of written history. You know, since the end of World War II, and I got out in, 86. You hadn't had those countries that had the kind of peace. And so I always thought Pax Romana, because in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son. In other words, when the time was right, and I know you've heard the lessons, it's been preached to you, but it's legit. You have the whole world speaking, pretty much speaking Greek, or at least you know some Greek because you go to the market and you want to sell your goods, you want to buy goods. Just like today, if you want to fly an airplane, guess what language you have to know? English. You have to know English to be a commercial pilot or to fly. I mean, they needed a medium of language, and English is it. Well, in that time, it was Greek. You had the roads being built. Let me tell you a quick story. When I was in Germany, a friend of mine, a German friend, he is, what we called national. He lived there, and he took me to a place, I don't even know where it was. And it didn't mean anything to me then. I mean, I was thankful just to be with him, be at this cool place. Oh, that's neat. You got a good view. The significance of it was he told me this is the farthest Roman outpost in Germany. I mean, you could see the road was still, where it had been laid. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool. If I could do that now, I would have taken a lot more pictures. Let me tell you something, because you think of Hadrian's Wall in Britain, you think of the power of Rome. God sent forth his son during this time. You've got excellent roads. I wish those guys were building our freeways. You ought to drive. We have an I-59 at my house. You might as well be on a gravel road somewhere. But anyway, the roads, the language, the peace just hadn't been like that forever. And this is when Christ comes. This is the perfect time. And I love that aspect. Well, if you listen to Hagee, he talks about the 10 toes. Wants to talk about the toes. And so he had this whole element. And when you had the European Union, remember the 10 nations formed the European, all the premillennialists just went nuts. Here we are, By the way, Britain's pulled out. But why is that? Because they need this to come back. Because it was during the days of these kings, Daniel said, that God would set up his throne, would set up his kingdom. Well, they're not happy with the one we got in Acts chapter 2. They want a real physical kingdom where they can go and rule. In order to do that, they've got to get these kings back in power, and this is where they do it. They do it with the toes and try to say that that's still in the future. You and I know that we're in the kingdom today. Reason being, we can read the scriptures. Also, if you know a little bit about Bible geography, it helps to know that you've got the Great Line here. That's going to be the Babylonia, the Chaldean. You've got the bear with the 2 bones, Medo-Persian Empire. You've got the swift leopard that represents Alexander the Great, who took over the same statue you have in Daniel chapter 2 is in Daniel chapter 7, and of course the great beast, of course, being Rome. Let's continue on here. We've already looked at most of this, I think. I want you to draw your attention to Assyria in 845 BC. Now, this was a couple years before Brother G was born. The Assyrians, I don't know if you even heard me, the Assyrians had ruled the world beginning with Tiglath-Pileser. He is going to be the king, and that's going to be the way it is for a while. When you have the prophets Isaiah, he's writing about the Assyrians, the bad things they're going to do. That's the first major kingdom that we concern ourselves with, and they're the top dog. But that's going to change because you got a little startup kingdom over here in Babylon, the Chaldeans, a fellow by the name of Nabopolassar. And he is the father of Nebuchadnezzar. And in 625, he rebels against Assyria. It doesn't go too well the first time around, but he does it again and actually separates himself. He has a son who happens to be a great general. His name's Nebuchadnezzar, and he defeats and takes Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. And then it all comes to a head. It all comes to a head up here in a place where, and you know this from Josiah, remember? Josiah goes out to meet Pharaoh, who's going up to fight. And so, in 605, Nebuchadnezzar defeats Pharaoh, Necho, at Carchemish. This right here, this area here, Carchemish, is where you're going to have the remnant, the Assyrians, trying to hold on to what they've got. You got the Chaldeans, and see, the Pharaoh, he's really trying to help the Assyrians to some degree because it offers some stability, and these guys won't be so powerful because, you know, they get powerful enough where they go down and give Egypt a really hard time, take over part of their property. And so here is a breakdown of those kingdoms. You see the Babylonian kingdoms and the Greek, the Persian kingdom, of course, it's much bigger. The Arabian desert, it's just a place where nobody's hanging out. And this is the Persian Empire. Then the history, Nebuchadnezzar, of course, he's going to take over and he's going to besiege Jerusalem in 606 to 605. But his father dies, and so he needs to go back and establish his throne. You know, you got to set it up, make sure everybody knows who the top dog is on the porch, if you will. And so here we are. This is when it just really starts to get interesting. 609, Nebuchadnezzar takes that first wave. This is when the 70 years is going to start. But it starts off with just the creme de la creme. The princes, the guys who, this king thinks, I'm going to raise up these boys. They're going to be in my court. They're going to be part of my wise men. I'm taking the best that this country's got to offer. That's the first deportation in 609. Ezekiel and the major flow of all of Israel is going to come over, or Judah, I should say, in 597. Remember, you know, by the rivers of Babylon, and you got that song we sing. Ezekiel sits down. He gets the vision of God. Ezekiel, I think, has the toughest job of all the prophets, in my opinion. Now, Isaiah and them probably wouldn't appreciate that. But he gets taken over here, and his job is to make sure the Jews realize Jerusalem's done. See, Jerusalem's still going on. There's still people living in Jerusalem. It has not been razed. It's still functioning. It's not nothing like it was, of course, but it's still there. And so most people are over here thinking, well, it'll be okay. We'll do a couple years here, and then we'll go back. And Ezekiel's job is, remember all the little goofy things he has to do? Put up the sage mounds, turn the skillet upside down, put the little soldiers all around it. He'd have to go around lay on one side for 300-something days or whatever it was, and then lay on his other side. He had to do all these things, and these were pictures of what was going to happen. Remember, he had to dig out a hole and crawl under it, you know, with his stuff. And that was representing of, that's exactly how Zedekiah, King Zedekiah, last king of Judah, I get all of them mixed up. But that's exactly how he leaves Jerusalem, remember? And he runs. Of course, they catch him. And remember the last thing he sees? Hezekiah, right? Last king of Israel? Judah, I mean. Who's that? Zedekiah. Remember the last thing he sees? His son's being killed. He's not dead, though. What happens to him? Eyes are put out. That's prophecy as well. And so Ezekiel, he does that, digs a hole, crawls under with all this stuff. And all of that, Jerusalem's going down. And then Jerusalem goes down. No more. You can imagine the 50,000 refugees now living in Babylon, what their mindset must have been. There has never been a time when an entire nation has been carried away and then lo and behold goes back. I mean, that just doesn't happen. So you can imagine, well, that's where Ezekiel's job changes. And that's where you get the Valley of Dry Bones. See, as a denominational person, the Valley of Dry Bones, I was taught that meant something totally different. And that what happened in 1945 through 47 with the nation of Israel becoming a country, you know, under the World War II treaties and all that, I was taught that Valley of Dry Bones is a picture of Israel coming into power again. And now everything's getting right so we can have this one world, Christ ruling in his kingdom there in Jerusalem. Brethren, there's a lot of folks that have thought that. Do you remember what Alexander Campbell's first publication was? What do you call that thing? Remember? Millennial Harbinger. Now, he wasn't a premillennialist, but he believed that what God was doing was working with everybody, trying to get everybody good so that we could have this period of a utopia, if you will, a millennia of, and that wasn't right either, But I was told that. And then to be able to learn and see history and realize what happened. You see, Ezekiel is there, and now he's got to change and say, we are going back. We are going to go back. And they didn't want to believe him in that regard either. Then you have Zechariah. Of course, that's the king. 587, has his eyes put out, goes. And so you have 3 deportations, probably a 4th with this fellow by the name of Nebuzaradan. He's the captain of, and you just look this up yourself because nobody ever talks much about this 4th deportation. I would go to Jeremiah 52:30. He takes 745 people. All the persons were 4,600, and this is not part of that other 3. So that's something to look at. But the thing that I didn't know about, and I would listen to guys like Hagee, I would listen to them talking about Israel's going to come back. They're going to be restored. The Bible says Israel's going to be rebuilt. And I'm sitting there reading and going, man, it says that, don't it? How do you put that together? What I didn't know is it had already happened. And that's the great thing about Bible geography, Bible history. Zerubbabel, he comes back. Remember, there's a fellow by the name of Cyrus who's mentioned twice in the book of Isaiah. He's going to be my servant, God said. He's going to send my people back. Not only does he send the people back, but he finances it. He gives them money and so forth to go back. So that you have that first wave in 538. It could be better. Everybody's really excited and they get there, but then it just kind of fizzles out, right? We kind of get the Temple Mount started and then we just kind of don't get it going anywhere. Well, notice the difference there now. Notice the timeline. 538, we're counting down, remember, going to 0. 458, about 80 years. Then you have Ezra going, and what is he doing? He's trying to teach people the law. He's trying to encourage them to do what's right. They're doing all kinds of things they shouldn't have been doing. They're following in the footsteps of Solomon, if you ask me, because they're marrying all those strange women. And I don't mean they had 3 eyes and 4 feet or something. They were just not the people they were supposed to be marrying, which is what the last part of chapter 9 and chapter 10 are talking about. In Ezra, they need to put away their strange wives. And then you have another, in 444, Nehemiah comes back. And you remember what Nehemiah wants to do and does? Yeah, rebuild the wall. They needed to have that wall established so that they could conduct what they needed to do in security. You talk what? Nehemiah is a man's man. I really, really appreciate him. And but you had 3, and what happens? Jerusalem is reestablished. The temple is rebuilt. Nehemiah comes back, rebuilds the wall. It's there, and that's 450 years before the Christ. And here, most of us poor little old denominational people are still looking for Jesus to come back. And hopefully them Jews can get it squared away so he can come back and have a place to live. Totally just not right. But I didn't know all this. And boy, when I learned it, I don't even know if that's how you would say that. Once I became aware of that, it certainly made my uneasiness much better. So in chapter 1 there, you have this in your book. Bible Lands Overview. Mount Ararat. Remember what's the significance of Mount Ararat? What happened there? There was a big wreck. You remember that? Guy driving a boat, ran slap into it. Remember the ark? Yeah. The Ark of the Covenant comes to rest at Mount Ararat. And now notice where it is. Way up here, the Caspian Sea, by the way, salt water, Black Sea, fresh water. Mount Ararat's up here in these mountains. And boy, this is very mountainous. As a matter of fact, it's mountainous way over here. Remember when John Mark goes with Paul and Barnabas and decides once he gets there, I want to go back because it's terrible. It's tough sledding, if you will, because the mountainous region. Well, Mount Ararat is way to the north. And then he talks about in the south, you have he talks about the Fertile Crescent. We've looked at that. And I'm going the wrong way. There we go, Mount Ararat. And then Mount Sinai. So he says from up here, Mount Ararat to Mount Sinai, that's pretty much going to be the scope of what we're going to look at as far as Bible lands. Now, at the end of this course, you're going to be looking at some other areas like Rome and Corinth. I think you'll find real interesting, or at least it is real interesting, and I find it real enriching as well. So Mount Sinai, that's where the law is given. But Isaiah talks about a law is going to go forth from Zion. Now, where's Zion? Zion is Jerusalem, yes. And so there's going to be a law, a kingdom established where the law is going to go forth from Zion. What's he talking about? He's talking about the new covenant. He's talking about the church. He's talking about the kingdom. And so here we have the Persian Empire. And notice the extent of this bad boy. And I think what's interesting, this is 127 provinces by the time of Esther, right? And you know they had to write those laws and all these languages that are spoke here. They had to translate that. But do you realize they could get that from here to there? Or actually, it would be what? Here, Elam, Susa. Susa is the palace. Boy, look that up. Google that. It's pretty cool. It's amazing how big that place was. You're going to find Daniel spends a lot of time there. He's meditating there and writing there. From there, they could get it across the entire kingdom in 7 days. They had a Pony Express system set up where they had those fine Arabian horses. And so the Persian king could give out an order, and there you go. Fertile Crescent, we've already talked about. If you lived and needed to, if you were alive, you lived somewhere in there. Also down here, there were some areas where you could live as well. There's some of these places that are mentioned, particularly in Isaiah, where oasis, and there's real interesting things on YouTube, documentaries about some of these places and the water systems that they had learned that, you can't run the water completely because it would get a vacuum, but you had to have a certain angle that the pitch could be where the water would continue to flow. And they would bring that down from mountains. It's amazing. And we're talking about 2,000-3,000 years ago. A lot of times we don't give people of antiquity the smarts, the kudos that we should. Notice here we've already talked about the two rivers. That's Mesopotamia is the Greek word talking about that. Land between the rivers is the translation. Large bodies of water can't beat the Mediterranean Sea, right? Persian Gulf, we didn't know a lot about it, but I think everybody's got a good idea where it is now. Caspian Sea, we're going to look at each one of these. The Mediterranean, man, so much going on here, so much history, so much death and dying and despair too. The Portuguese, that's another thing too. You think about Portuguese. I don't know nothing about Portuguese, but it's not the same Spanish they speak here. Portuguese is a little bit different. But if you go to what South American country where you speak Portuguese, That's exactly right. Yeah. If you go to Disney World, you'll be speaking Portuguese too. Por favor. They tell you which one of them trams you're supposed to ride or whatever. But I just think that's amazing how these countries that we read about years ago and how good they were at sailing. Mediterranean, then here you have, of course, the Persian Gulf. And you can see how dangerous this place is. You have all this oil coming out of here. It has to go through here. And when you're reading nowadays, I can't even think of that latest Muslim groups that's firing rockets at all the ships going through there. It's some new, some new thing. Every time you think you've got it figured out on what terrorist organization or group of extremists, rather than that's something we ought to take note of as well. Islam is a very bad thing, and they're really into killing people. And if they can kill you, they'll kill you because you're a chip on. You're a help them get to heaven. It's an amazing thing. But what worries me about it is the influx of the folks. Used to we had to go to Nashville to find a mosque, but now you can just drive right up here past Hamilton's place, right? You got the building over there with a funny top on it. Yeah, and they don't call them mosques. What do they call them now? Change the name. I wonder why. They call them Islamic centers, Islamic cultural centers. It's the same thing. Well, this is not a class on Islam, is it? But that open border that we have, with all the problems we already have with communist China and with your Islamic fundamental groups that just want to make a name for themselves, we just need to take view. Caspian Sea is the largest body of water surrounded by land in the world. It's also a salt lake in the world. Any of y'all ever been to Salt Lake City? Isn't it amazing how many mosquitoes can live on the corner and all that salt? You would think if anything could kill it. Man, I thought I was going to get eaten alive before we could get back to the car. But anyway, Caspian Sea, salt water, it's the biggest. And think of these two. You got Russia, Kazakhstan, the Ukraine, and Turkey, Muslim, and you got all this. And boy, isn't it just great this is here? And isn't it great that is there, in that it keeps these folks from killing each other even more than they would. And of course, now you read about these rockets and ships and navies, and it's, just going to get worse, I think. Major you got the Red Sea and the Black Sea. The Red Sea, of course, is the one that's got the antennas now. You'll need to know this. I'm pretty sure he'll probably ask you something about that at some point. The Suez is to the left. Suez Canal right there beside Egypt is one way to remember that. The other one is the Gulf of Aqaba. Two little antennas, if you will, like rabbit. Wow. I'm going to have to worry about my terminology. There's not many people that know what rabbit ears are anymore, except ears on a bunny. Y'all remember we used to have to go adjust those things and try to channel 9 was this way, and then if you needed channel 3, you had to turn it all the way over here. Oh, those were the days. I was our family remote. You've got the Black Sea. There we go. Black Sea. Talked about it. Major rivers. You got the Tigris, Euphrates. Talked about those already. This one right here is that bottom one there. The Orontos, I guess is how you'd say that. About 250 miles. It's the one that, skipped right over it. It is up in here, and it becomes significant when we get down into Palestine. And so the reason I ask you to know that is that the maps you'll see there, it'll account for that river. And that's one that you probably would help yourself, because that's about the northern extremity of the Bible lands. You have the Nile River, 4,000 miles long, 100 miles longer than the Amazon River. If I was in the Amazon, I think I'd be digging me another 100 miles of river just so they could be number one. Mississippi, of course, is the biggest river we have in our country. Let's see, the Nile, remember we said it flows from south to north. And look at all this, brother. Look at all this. You got the Temple of Luxor. You got the two big things of Ramesses. You got the pyramids of Giza. We think of the Sphinx. And what are all of these representations of? These big major projects. What all they are? What are all they? What's that? Idol worshippers, but for dead people. Yeah. So, because they wanted to be able to go where? Across the river Styx and all that stuff. Israel needed to get out of Egypt because they were a bunch, just like Abraham had to leave the Ur of Chaldees probably because of the pagan influences. Boy, and I'm over time, ain't I? Same thing. All of that. Cults of priests and all these burning incense, offer sacrifice, and all these dead pharaohs trying to find their way to, it's just amazing. All the mix-ups with religion. Think about the mountains. We'll flow through this real quick. Mount Ararat, we already talked about that. You got the Lebanon Mountains. Those will be even important today. Anti-Lebanon Mountains, it just means you have a valley runs between the two and the Anti's on the other side. Significant barriers that we can see. And look at the Mount Hermon here. Now, what is the significance of Mount Hermon? Who's buried there? No man buried him. He was buried by the very hands of God. Remember who that was? Moses. And what's significant about that place in Michael? You ever read the book of Jude? Even Michael, when he was fighting with Satan over the body of Moses. Come on, y'all read Jude once or twice, right? Yeah. Got to brush up those cobwebs now. We're talking from Genesis to Revelation, right? Mount Hermon. Look at it. Isn't that beautiful? That's one of the things about, and I've always impressed with California and out west. It's just you can be down here and it's 80 degrees and you know that it's really cold up there because you can still see the snow on the mountains. Just these huge barriers, that kept countries kind of separated. Kingdom, cities, and lands, real quick. You got the political map of Mesopotamia, The biggest red thing is going to be the Persian Empire. Inside of that, you'll have the Babylonian. You'll have the Assyrian. And so just kind of have that in your head. We already talked about. This is big. If you've got a map of Israel real quick, I'd highly encourage you to know these, okay? Not so much this. You don't really read about that a whole lot. But these three, oh my. They are four. They are just five. They just thorns in Israel's flesh. Edomites, who were they kin to? Who was their great-great-great-great-grandpappy? Esau, that's right. And then you have these two boys right here. That's great. These grandfathers had an interesting beginning, right? They were procreated in a cave somewhere over there with their grandfather, their daddy, whose name was Lot. You remember that situation? Not a good situation. So the Ammonites, the Moabites, Edomites, they are thorns in Israel's flesh. The Philistines, major problem for Israel, particularly with their kings. You have what we call the United Kingdom. Who were the three kings? Saul, that's right, David and Solomon. And so Jerusalem is the capital. How long does David rule there? Not 40, is it? Because he does 7.5 where? Hebron. Why does he start out in Hebron? He's a homeboy. That's where he's from, right? Hebron. Starts having his family there, moves to Jerusalem, but he reigns for 40 years. How long did Saul reign? 40 years. And then Solomon's going to reign 40 years, 120-year United Kingdom. Then what happens? The kingdom is divided because of the sin of Solomon. We've already talked about that. But who anoints the first two kings of Israel? Last judge. Samuel. But who anoints Solomon? Remember that? They changed the guard there with David and Nathan. There you go. Those are just little things that will help you in your mind to kind of keep these timelines together. As Saul is not going to be a judge anymore. Samuel's not going to be a judge anymore because Israel wants a what? A king. And boy, if you ever want to talk about government, just go read what Samuel tells them is going to happen with that king. Going to take your daughters. They're going to be apothecaries. They're going to be, what do you call them, people that make candy? Confectionaries. They're going to work in his kitchen. They're going to make his tapestries and so forth. And your young men, they're going to be in his navy. They're going to be in his army. They're going to take care of his animals. They're going to, it's going to cost you. And what they say? Serve it up, baby. That's the way we want it. Absolutely amazing. But remember these, the Phoenicians, Tyre and Sidon, always pretty much a threat too. And it's real interesting there, and my time's up and I need to hush. But Tyre is a very significant thing to know about. God brings Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar goes, and remember he gets there, and boy, now I mean, he's been doing it for years. They finally break through, and what's he get? Nothing. Everybody's gone. Remember where they went? A little island right out from that. And they're like, man, that stinks. And so they leave. Remember, God talks about he didn't get no money. His army didn't get any pay and so forth. But there's another fellow that comes back later, name's Alexander the Great. And he gets there, and you remember what he does? I encourage you to go home, look at it on Google Maps. He gets there, he takes the old town, and he just pushes it out into the ocean and makes a causeway out to this little island place where they were. I thought they was going to get away from him. And, of course, he takes it over, and they fall, a place they, of course, never thought they would fall. But if you go to Google Maps and look up, I don't think it's called Tyre today. It's a little bit different, but you can see it on the map because this right here, boy, we ain't even talked about that either. Shame on me. This little outcrop right here is Mount Carmel. I should have showed. Geography 101. Lake Eula flows down to the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee's got 3 names. Remember what they are? Very good. Gennesaret, right? Gennesaret. Why they do that's to confuse me and you. That's all that's about. Okay, but what's significant about this area right here? Who hung out? What's that? That's where Jesus hung out. Yeah, this is where he was raised. Nazareth right here. It's not a rock and roll band. It's a place where the Lord was raised. Then this is the Jordan. Doesn't look anything like that. It's as serpentine as you. But anyway, that's Jordan, and then it flows into the Dead Sea. go to the top of the Dead Sea, go straight west, and make you a little star, and boom, you've got Jerusalem. You've got Mount Carmel here, 1 Kings 17:18. Remember what takes place here with Elijah and who? The 450 prophets of Baal. That's significant there. Man, I've enjoyed it. We'll see how much I didn't get done. Hey, looky there, man. We're like 2 pages away. Look at that. Are we good or what? That was what I was going to have you fill out. Remember, Lake Eula, Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, Mount Carmel. Of course, turn that up. And I've enjoyed it, brother, and I hope you've learned something. And it's been a benefit for you being here tonight. We'll go ahead and, are we still on?